Your calendar is full. Your soul is on a wait list. When life hardens into a color-coded spreadsheet, the fool shows up grinning, with permission to be a beginner, to ask the dumb question, to tell the truth out loud. He doesn't make life trivial. He makes it honest enough to feel alive. We live in a culture that mistakes a furrowed brow for depth. Productivity has become our vernacular, our accent, the rhythm of our days. We count steps, likes, minutes, dollars, and data points until our attention feels collateralized. The strange part is how easily this all passes for meaning. You can keep hitting your marks and still miss your life. The fool knows this in his bones. He wanders in without a resume or a PowerPoint, as if to remind us that the most essential human capacities, wonder, courage, play, do not show up on a dashboard. He is not an enemy of seriousness. He is the cure for its anemia. Where everything is tense, he loosens the jaw. Where everything is rigid, he puts a hinge. Where we are tempted to worship control, he lights a small, non-compliant candle named joy. Some people hear fool and think stupid, as if the archetype were a punchline. But the fool is not dumb. He is brave in a way the polished rarely are. He is willing to look naive, not because he is naive, but because he values truth more than social camouflage. Real wisdom often arrives disguised as humility, and humility looks suspiciously like inexperience at first glance. That's why the fool is the beginning of wisdom's road. He is unafraid of the first step. He refuses the theater of omniscience and, with a disarming smile, says the sentence that resets a room. I don't know. From that doorway, learning can finally happen. Writers and dramatists have always kept the fool close whenever stakes climb. Shakespeare understood that when tragedy tightens like a knot, it's the jester who slips a thin truth between the strands. Fest in Twelfth Night, and the fool in King Lear see through ceremonial clothing and speak to the person inside it. Their jokes do not cheapen the moment. They smuggle oxygen into a choking scene. Erasmus, with a sly grin in praise of folly, let folly herself monologue, praising her own charms so extravagantly that the reader, laughing, notices how many of society's serious pursuits are vanity in tailored suits. The message lands because a smile opened the gate. Modern America understands this more than we admit. Comedians and late-night hosts function as licensed contrarians, truth-tellers in a country that gets nervous around naked honesty. When a topic is too hot for straight talk, a joke cools it just enough to hold. We pretend we tune in for the laughs, but often we come for the moment when a joke peels back a euphemism and shows us the machinery. That's the fool at work, not trivializing, but alchemizing, turning discomfort into clarity. Yet the fool is not merely a stage role. He's also a posture you can take toward your own life. Consider any meeting where the obvious problem moves like a ghost through the slides. Everyone senses it, no one names it. A junior staffer raises a hand and asks the forbidden question, the one that seems embarrassingly basic. The room stiffens, then exhales. In that awkward beat, reality walks in and takes a seat. It isn't brilliance that saves the day. It's the courage to risk appearing unprepared. The fool's gift is permission. Permission to put truth above performance, curiosity above composure. Because he is not busy defending an image, the fool can pay attention. He notices the thread through the noise, the small hinge that might swing the heavy door. This attention has a particular flavor to it, playful, agile, a bit mischievous. Play is not the opposite of work. It's the opposite of paralysis. In states of play, the brain explores more, connects faster, tolerates uncertainty longer. Anyone who has solved a stubborn problem in the shower knows this intuitively. The fool's grin is not an evasion. It's an operating system tuned for discovery. Still, it's fair to ask whether the fool courts danger. He does, though not the trickster's kind. A trickster manipulates, a fool disarms. The danger is social rather than moral. He threatens the illusion of control that keeps brittle systems intact. When an organization survives by pretending, the fool's honesty feels like a breach, even when it is the first breath of healing. That's why power tolerates him ambivalently. In medieval courts, the jester could tease the king and live, not because monarchs were cute about criticism, but because the jester created a pressure valve. He spoke what courtiers could not, and in doing so kept the whole arrangement from calcifying into delusion. Somewhere in that exchange is a lesson for our own institutions. If you want resilience, you must protect the voice that risks awkward truths. There is, however, a shadow to contend with. Sometimes the rhetoric of not taking anything seriously is simply avoidance in costume. A quip can be a shield that blocks intimacy as easily as it can be a bridge toward it. The fool at his best doesn't dodge commitment. He brings lightness to it. He can make a vow and keep it with a grin, walk a hard road, and still find a way to laugh that isn't cruel or numb. When frivolity impersonates freedom, the result is cynicism with a smiley face sticker. The real fool is allergic to that. His laughter has consequences. It leaves the air clearer than it found it. Notice how his sense of joy carries a particular tenderness. He shows up at both weddings and wakes because he understands how humor widens the chest so grief and gratitude can both fit. A joke told at the right time is not a detour from reality. It is a way back into it. That is why families tell stories at funerals and why, in hospital corridors at 3 a.m., nurses trade one-liners that keep the floor moving. Laughter ventilates the soul when the windows stick. The fool's medicine is oxygen, not opium. On the level of personal growth, the fool is the anti-perfectionist. He will try a new language with a terrible accent and somehow befriend half the cafe before his espresso cools. He will join the dance with 2 left feet and find, by the end of the song, that the room has shifted from spectators to participants. He refuses the myth that skill must precede joy. Joy, he insists, is a teacher. You don't wait to be good before you begin. You begin, and goodness grows in the doing. Applied to work, relationships, or creative practice, this is subversive. It dismantles the procrastination loop built on the fear of not being excellent on the first attempt. Excellence, the fool would tell you, is what happens to curiosity after many evenings of showing up. This can sound naive until you remember how often timidity dresses up as prudence. The perfectly timed plan that never starts is just another way to keep the heart safe from the weather of real experience. The fool isn't reckless. He's generous with beginnings. He extends them not only to himself, but to others, lowering the social cost of trying. In his presence, you are less afraid to say, "I don't get it," and more likely to follow with, "But I'd love to." That shift, from performing to participating, changes rooms, teams, friendships, and homes. In public life, the fool's value rises as conversations grow more armored. When every sentence feels focus grouped, spontaneous honesty becomes an endangered species. The fool protects it. He speaks before the varnish, and that roughness reads as trustworthiness. We recognize the cadence. It sounds like humans talking. There is a reason clips of unscripted sincerity travel farther than polished statements. People are thirsty for speech that risks being real. The fool makes that risk feel survivable. Put differently, he rearranges the emotional economics of a moment. Fear says the price of honesty is exile. The fool shows you the discount. Sometimes the price is only a brief blush and a laugh. Fear says failure is fatal. The fool reframes it as tuition with a goofy student ID photo. Fear says your value is measured by performance. The fool invites you to remember a deeper worth that arrived with your first breath. It is astonishing how much becomes possible once these prices are honestly recalculated. There's a detail from everyday life that captures his spirit perfectly. Picture a child learning to ride a bike. The adult holds the seat, jogs behind, shouts encouragement, and then, at exactly the wrong moment and the right one, let's go. There's wobble, panic, a near fall, and then the trembling miracle of balance. The wind on the face teaches more in 5 seconds than a lecture could in 50 minutes. That's the fool's pedagogy. He releases the seat. He trusts that a small measure of risk is the tuition for the skill called aliveness. Of course, the world can be cruel to those who look unarmored. That's why the fool's apparent softness is paired with an inner toughness. He does not crumble when he blushes, and he does not apologize for delight. He knows that most contempt is frustrated longing in disguise, and that the quickest way to disarm it is to keep shining without spite. He also knows when a room is playing zero-sum games, and has the good sense to step outside, breathe, and find a different door. There is strategy in his silliness, a homing instinct for better air. If you look closely, you'll see that entire fields depend on a fool-like willingness to risk inelegance at the start. Science advances because someone asks a question that sounds naive next to elegant theories. Art renews itself when a painter or poet breaks a rule and then stays long enough to find the beauty inside the mess. Entrepreneurship exists because someone shrugs off the shame of a first draft and ships something real. Every discipline that expands human possibility begins with the same gesture. A person stops performing expertise and starts exploring reality. That is the fool's invitation to each of us. He isn't asking you to become slapstick or to sneer at structure. He is asking whether your seriousness still has a pulse. He is wondering if you can trade a little certainty for a lot of life, if you can tolerate the mild embarrassment that comes with first steps in exchange for the exhilaration of motion. He suspects you can. He suspects you're tired of mistaking momentum for meaning and composure for truth. So perhaps tonight, when the blue light finally dims and the lists stop muttering, you try a small experiment in his spirit. Tell a single unvarnished truth in a place where you usually hedge. Ask a question you've been swallowing because you don't want to look uninformed. Begin something you care about at the unglamorous level called bad at it, and refuse to apologize for learning in public. Notice, as you do, how the room subtly changes shape around the new honesty. Notice what loosens in your chest. Notice how quickly laughter, real laughter, not the sarcastic kind, makes space for courage. If you find yourself smiling, that's the point. Not because life has become trivial, but because it has become real enough to touch. The fool didn't come to empty your work of weight or your days of duty. He came to slip a key into the lock you forgot was there, the one that opens to beginner's mind, to playful attention, to the kind of sincerity that breathes. In a nation fluent in performance, that sincerity is a second language worth relearning. And in a life overfull of proof, permission might be the one thing you were missing. Permission to begin, to blunder, to ask, to laugh, and, in the end, to be unmistakably alive. The strangest kind of wisdom is the kind that begins with a confession. Picture a crowded Athenian marketplace and an old man with a patient face saying, almost casually, that his only knowledge is of his own ignorance. It isn't a stunt, it's a doorway. Socrates' line has echoed through centuries not because it flatters us, but because it unsettles us into clarity. The wise fool stands there, palm open, making a trade anyone can make, but almost no one attempts. Certainty for attention. He does not posture as a sage on a hill. He starts at street level, where the air smells like figs and arguments, and he asks questions that pry pretense from the hinges. The power of "I don't know" is not weakness, it's traction. It lets a mind bite into reality instead of sliding across it with the frictionless sheen of opinion. In American life, we are taught to lead with answers. Our resumes read like armor. We fear that if we unclench even a little, the room will decide we are unqualified to be in it. The wise fool breaks that spell by refusing the performance. He does not confuse volume with conviction or swagger with courage. He asks to see the bottom of an idea the way a jeweler asks to see the underside of a ring, not to break it, but to judge its weight and cut. On a good day, he looks like a friend who listens so closely you hear yourself better. On a great one, he sounds like a comic who cracks a joke that lands with a thud, and then a hush, and then a relief that spreads like a weather change. The laugh was the key that opened the message. Say the thing, name the pattern, tell the truth you were taught to dodge. It takes nerve to do that in public. Nerve, and a tenderness most people miss when they watch only the edges. The wise fool is not cruel. He refuses to trade clarity for cleverness. He knows the difference between the kind of joke that humiliates and the kind that unfreezes. In a courtroom of the soul, he prefers cross-examination to crossfire. When he tells the emperor he has no clothes, he looks the man in the eye as a human being rather than a meme. There is a mercy in the way he speaks plainly. Mercy for the listener who needs someone to cut through the powdered sugar of euphemism. Mercy for the person on the spot, who is being offered a way back to reality that doesn't demand a public collapse. If you want to see the wise fool at work, walk into any American workplace the morning after a failed launch. The room buzzes with language that coats discomfort like frosting. It was a learning, someone says. We'll pivot. There's a lot to celebrate. You nod, because that is the choreography. And then the junior analyst, the one who mostly takes notes, clears her throat and says, carefully, we built the wrong thing. A pause opens that feels a little like vertigo and a little like oxygen. The sentence does not blame, it names. And in that first honest inch, possibilities return that could not exist inside the haze of spin. The wisest thing in the room was the courage to speak a simple sentence that everyone already knew, but no one wanted to hold. Every culture builds mechanisms to tolerate that kind of sentence. Medieval courts used jesters as licensed truth-tellers. Our republic outsources part of this function to comedians, columnists, oddball uncles, nurses on night shift, kids who ask why the flag is folded a certain way, pastors who lay aside the sermon and talk about death like it actually happens to people we love. A society that cannot stomach the wise fool becomes a society that can't metabolize correction. It inflates around its errors until a small puncture becomes a catastrophic tear. The fool, done well, is an inoculation against that collapse. Of course, inoculations sting. It is easier to clap for truth when it is televised than to welcome it at your own dinner table. The moment someone turns to you and says, "That sounded like you were avoiding the question," you can feel your body reach for a shield. The culturally acceptable shields are sarcasm and distraction and the sudden rediscovery of your calendar. The wise fool recognizes the reflex and waits it out. He does not escalate. He holds the moment steady until the human being behind the role has a chance to climb back into the conversation. Then he asks again, more gently, and the grace of a second try makes everything possible. It helps to remember that the fool's authority doesn't come from credentials. It comes from skin in the game. He is the person who will risk embarrassment to keep the room honest and then stay long enough to shoulder the consequences of honesty. He can make the hard phone call, own the miss, apologize without turning the apology into a performance. He offers himself as the first domino, the one that permits collapse of the pose. When that happens, a team becomes a team again. The story changes from we maintain optics to we learn in public. The floor tilts toward trust. In the news, you see shadows of this dance every night. A comedian jokes about a headline everyone is scared to touch. The laugh lands. And in the echo of it, the truth becomes sayable. The laughter didn't trivialize the subject. It softened the listener's jaw so the sentence could pass. Years ago, a teacher did that for you in a classroom without cameras. Maybe she interrupted a buzzword storm with a question as old as dirt. What do you mean? It sounded rude to your teenage ears. Later you realized it was the most respectful thing she could have asked. Respect doesn't mean nodding along. Respect means believing your mind is capable of more than reciting a script. There is a tightrope here. Wander too far in one direction and the fool becomes a scold. Wander too far in the other and he becomes a cynic who knocks over furniture for applause. The wise path is narrow and luminous. It is built from the discipline of looking, the willingness to feel foolish for a beat, and the choice to place truth above triumph. That discipline produces a different kind of charisma, one that's quiet at first. People lean in not because you shine, but because they recognize their own reality shining back. Sometimes literature provides the cleanest mirror. Consider the moment in King Lear when the fool needles the old man not to wound, but to rescue. The fool's doggerel bites because it is adolescent in the way lightning is adolescent. A brief, jagged correction that reminds everyone what's actually at stake. Or think of Dostoevsky's Prince Mishkin, whose idiocy is a kind of radical innocence that sees through social machinery. He is not savvy enough to flatter cruelty, which is another way of saying he is too sane to make a home inside it. These characters carry a costly gift. They show you the world without the narcotic of fashion. In their presence, you feel the ache of wanting to be good more than you want to appear accomplished. It is tempting, hearing all this, to draft yourself as the household fool and start announcing your truths like weather alerts. That would be a mistake. The archetype is not a license to dump your unfiltered thoughts on people who can't leave the room. The art lies in timing, tone, and aim. The timing is chosen for the sake of repair, not victory laps. The tone stays human, even when the facts are harsh. And the aim is toward the thing that will help, not the thing that will trend. The wise fool can wait a day to speak if tonight's truth would shatter rather than bend. He can choose a softer angle not because he fears backlash, but because mercy tends to work better than mortars. If you want to practice, borrow Socrates' trick. Ask one more question than you're comfortable asking. Keep it small and clean and honest. When you feel the familiar surge of performance rising in your chest, try the sentence that resets the room. I don't know. Yet. The yet matters. It commits you to movement. Then go find out. Read past the headline. Call the person you quoted. Admit the part you misunderstood and share what changed after you learned. You will look human, which is frightening, and you will become persuasive, which is useful, and you will sleep better, which is grace. A curious thing happens when you live this way. People start bringing you their unfinished thoughts. They know you won't punish them for not having a script. They know you won't weaponize their half-formed ideas to score points later. You become a field where truth can grow untidy before it ripens. In that field, loyalty grows as a byproduct, not as a bargain. The fool's currency, humor, candor, beginner's mind, turns out to be sound money in any economy that still values reality. This posture also changes the way you receive correction. The wise fool does not love being wrong. He loves what being wrong can buy. It buys a better map. It buys a cleaner friendship. It buys a story worth telling 10 years from now, the kind that starts with, I thought I knew, and ends with a lesson that keeps someone else from walking into the same wall. He can laugh at himself because he suspects the joke is how little any of us truly grasp and how much we pretend we do. The laughter is humility with a melody. It keeps shame from hardening around the error like amber around a gnat. There is a sacred edge to all of this that some traditions call holy folly. The holy fool is the person who refuses the game so thoroughly that the game starts to look ridiculous. He declines status the way a swimmer declines extra coats. He would rather have room to move. In your ordinary life, this might look like choosing a plainer car than the raise could justify, or standing up for someone no one praises, or keeping your word when breaking it would be cheaper. To outside eyes, such moves often appear foolish. To the inside of your chest, they sound like breathing. I think often of a nurse I met in a hospital hallway at 2 a.m. She told me that the only way to make it through the shift was to tell the truth and tell a joke and not mix up the order. First the truth, so the family isn't lost. Then the joke, so their legs don't give out. The sequence stayed with me because it is the sequence of the wise fool. He does not use humor to seduce you away from reality. He uses it to keep you with him long enough to face it. What all of this finally demands is a choice less glamorous than courage and more durable than inspiration. It demands fidelity to reality. The wise fool does not worship novelty or purity or the spotlight. He stays married to what is. He returns to it after he is praised and after he is dragged. He trims his speech to suit it. He lets it contradict him and then revises without turning his revision into a morality play. He is, in short, the grown-up in a room full of people playing grown-up. And his kindness is not an effect, but a practice, a way of shortening the distance between what we say and what is true so that life can be lived more directly, with less waste and more light. If you were to strip this all the way down, you would find one small, renewable resource at the core: the willingness to be seen as you are while you reach for what is real. That willingness disarms posturing, invites honest company, and returns a little sanity to our overscripted days. It makes space for one more question, one more laugh, one more course correction before the ship runs aground. It is not glamorous work, but it is beautiful in the way good tools are beautiful. Fit to hand, back-saving, quietly indispensable. You can start anywhere. Start by choosing a sentence this week that you will speak without polish when polish would be easier. Start by letting someone else finish their thought without helping them fix it midstream. Start by telling yourself out loud that you might be wrong and that being wrong is a hallway, not a cell. Start by smiling, really smiling, when a small, embarrassing truth refuses to wait its turn and blurts itself into the world. That smile is the wise fool's calling card. It tells everyone present, including you, that this moment will not be wasted hiding from itself. There is a crossroads where three figures meet at twilight: the fool, the clown, and the trickster. From a distance they look like cousins: bright eyes, quick hands, pockets full of mischief. Step closer, and you feel the temperature change between them. The fool invites you to breathe. The clown invites you to feel. The trickster invites you to doubt. All three are necessary in doses and dangerous in excess. Confusing them is how good intentions slip their tethers and run feral. The fool's core is sincerity. He risks looking foolish to rescue what is true. The clown's core is feeling. He volunteers his face as an instrument for shared emotion, stretching it until joy and sorrow become legible even from the cheap seats. The trickster's core is disruption. He bends rules until they confess what they were hiding. On certain days, each one can look like a hero. On others, they'll test your patience. The difference rarely appears in the costume. It appears in the aim. The fool aims at honesty. The clown aims at relief. The trickster aims at revelation. Those aims can braid into something powerful: honesty that heals, revelation that relieves. But when they split from their center, the results curdle. The fool without sincerity is a poser. The clown without feeling is a smirk in makeup. The trickster without reverence for what he reveals is just arson with better branding. Most of us first met the clown in childhood, a bright comet at a party, a tumble in the aisle, an oversized shoe landing square on adult self-importance. We laughed then because someone finally gave our chaos a translator. But the clown has other faces. There is the hospital clown who knows when to whisper and when to squeak the red nose. The theater clown who turns a room with silence you can hear. The street clown who juggles in the rain and makes the afternoon feel less lonely. Underneath the paint is not just glee but discipline. The body trained to communicate what speech cannot reach. At his best, the clown is a steward of tenderness. He does not make your grief smaller. He sits beside it and makes space for your lungs. The phrase sad clown gets tossed around so easily that we forget it names a real paradox. The person who coaxes your laughter may be the one carrying the heaviest bag home. Humor can be both offering and armor. The audience sees the offering because it sparkles. The armor is harder to spot. It looks like a bit, a persona, an angle that keeps the comic safe from the heat of the room. The line between offering and armor is walked every night on small stages. Cross it too often and the laughter stops healing and starts numbing. The clown knows this and chooses to stay porous. He will risk a quiet moment to keep the exchange human. He will let the room see his hands shake. He understands that if he becomes invulnerable, his audience will be forced to carry all the vulnerability alone, and that's not a fair trade. Enter the trickster through the side door. He's older than any empire and fluent in every border. In the myth books, he slips into stories as a coyote who teaches by breaking, a spider who bargains, a god who cross-dresses the rules until the rules remember they were made for life, not the other way around. Loki, Hermes, Anansi, Coyote, each upends the furniture so the room can be seen anew. In modern dress, he shows up as the hacker who exposes the system's smugness, the journalist who seeds a question that unravels a lie, the graffiti that turns a sterile wall into a second opinion. He is not here to be nice. He is here to be necessary, and necessity can look rude from a comfortable chair. But the trickster has a toxin as well as a tonic. If he stops loving the world he reveals, his revelations become vandalism. He falls in love with the thrill of overturning and forgets to ask whether the table he flipped was holding a meal. That's how a culture gets irony poisoned, when cleverness stops being a tool for truth and becomes a sport played for its own applause. We have entire feeds designed to reward that appetite, 1,000 little accelerants poured on anything that burns bright, even if it leaves you colder afterward. The algorithm doesn't ask whether you learned or healed, it measures whether you reacted. The trickster at his best teaches you to question, then hands you back your heart. The trickster at his worst picks your pocket of patience and leaves you suspicious of everything, especially the things that deserve your trust. The fool navigates between them with a compass pointed at reality. He borrows the clown's tenderness and the trickster's daring and uses both in service of clarity. That is why he belongs in rooms where stakes are high and egos are brittle. He can tilt a conversation from performance into participation because he is not married to his mask. Watch him in a family argument that has frozen into ritual. The same lines, the same size, the same storm map on the living room carpet. He will crack a joke to loosen the script, then ask the one unscripted question that makes everyone blink. He did not win the argument. He freed it. American pop culture keeps circling this triangle because it is our mirror. We dress the trickster as a villain and then slip him our sympathy when he names hypocrisies we recognize. We dress the clown as a fool and then discover he's holding our aching reflection. We dress the fool as a child and then overhear him saying the only adult sentence in the room. The tension between these roles has powered more stories than we could list and more news cycles than we can stomach. But beneath the costume changes is a practical question for everyday life. When you open your mouth, which aim are you serving? Are you clearing the air, soothing the wound, or lighting a fuse? And do you know why? There's a simple test you can feel in the room. After the fool speaks, people breathe easier and see better. After the clown finishes, there's a quiet where bodies settle as if they were put down gently. After the trickster acts, the light is harsher and the edges sharper. Sometimes that is needed, sometimes it isn't. If, by contrast, the air gets thinner, if eyes dart toward exits, if the laughter leaves a hangover of small meannesses, then the aim wandered. It happens. The adjustment is not shame. The adjustment is attention. You aim again. The oldest stages where these figures practice are not theaters, but thresholds: weddings, funerals, births, recoveries, departures. The clown attends to the heart rate of the room. The trickster attends to its blind spots. The fool attends to its truth. I've seen a priest slip into fool gear to cut through the euphemisms of a memorial and name the death cleanly, so love had something true to hold. I've seen a nurse put on a half-drawn smile and clown just enough to get a stubborn child to extend her arm for the four. I've watched a reporter ask a trickster's question at a press conference so that an entire town could hear what the answer tried not to say. These are not abstractions. They are ordinary strategies of care. You can feel the difference inside your own chest when you borrow them well. When you put on the clown's soft shoes, your voice rounds out, and you choose a gentler door into the conversation. When you take up the trickster's staff, you're suddenly allergic to jargon, and you start loosening the screws on phrases that have trapped the truth inside them. When you wear the fool's small cap, you find yourself saying, "I might be wrong, but here's what feels real." And you watch as the temperature in the room drops from defensive to possible. The costume is metaphor, but the effect is measurable. Heart rates shift, shoulders lower. Eyes meet again after a long season of staring past one another. The dangers deserve a clean naming because the line between medicine and overdose runs right through them. The clown can slide into mockery, confusing an audience's laughter with license to humiliate. The trickster can harden into sabotage, mistaking disruption for depth. The fool can drift into performative humility, turning "I don't know" into a coy pose that dodges responsibility. Each has a corrective. The clown must remember the person behind the laugh and aim for their relief, not his own bravura. The trickster must remember what the smashed idol used to teach and offer something better than shards. The fool must remember that honesty without action is just good lighting on a motionless stage. Sometimes the antidote arrives as a story that karmas its way through the culture for a century. A man goes to a doctor and says he is desolate. "Go see the great clown Pagliacci," the doctor recommends. "But doctor," the man says, "I am Pagliacci." The punchline breaks like a small storm because it reveals a human economy we keep misreading. We assume laughter and despair are opposites, that the presence of one cancels the other. The story tells the truth. They often travel together, woven in the same person, working different shifts on the same heart. The wise response is not to demand that Pagliacci choose. It is to offer him a room where his offering does not require a disguise. When the mask comes off, you see how quickly these archetypes dissolve back into ordinary acts of courage. A manager admits the plan failed and names it without padding. A father apologizes to his son before the boy learns to rehearse resentment as a personality. A friend drops the bid and tells you she's scared. These are the smallest theaters with the largest stakes. They are where the fool earns his keep as a custodian of real conversations, the clown as a keeper of morale, the trickster as a guardian against self-deception. They don't need applause. They need practice. The internet complicates the practice by stretching our village square beyond our nervous system's design. Irony scales better than intimacy. Mockery travels faster than mercy. Trickster moves look like genius in a 15-second loop, while fool moves, pausing, clarifying, admitting, look like dead air. No wonder we train ourselves toward the expressions that get rewarded. The antidote is not retreat, it's recalibration. Put more of your attention where feedback smells like a kitchen and less where it smells like a carnival. Keep a few people who can tell you when your joke nicked a tendon and not just an ego. Ask someone outside your tribe to listen for whether your disruption pointed to a door or just a wall you enjoyed hitting. There is also a bodily wisdom in how these figures walk. The clown's walk is exaggerated, a visible reminder that the world can be elastic when we stop moving as if everything were brittle. The trickster's walk is light on the feet, ready to pivot, suspicious of straight lines that have been declared sacred. The fool's walk is simple. He moves where the truth is, even if it takes him through a puddle and ruins the shoes. Try these walks in private, and you'll notice how your language shifts to match your feet. Suddenly, the sentence you were sharpening for victory comes out rounded for understanding. The jab softens into a question. The suspicion relaxes into a curiosity that could learn. If you're wondering how any of this changes a life already crowded with obligations, start small enough to succeed. The next time a conversation starts to calcify, make a fool's move and name the thing no one wants to name. The next time someone's shoulders are up around their ears, make a clown's move and offer a bit of shared silliness that returns them to their body. The next time a policy or habit asks you to pretend something you know is false, make a trickster's move and reroute the ritual until the truth has room to stand up and stretch. None of this requires a stage. It requires attention to aim and the willingness to be briefly misunderstood on the way to being genuinely helpful. There is a dignity that grows in rooms where these three are welcome on purpose. Decisions improve, not because everyone suddenly becomes brilliant, but because the space for error widens and the tax on honesty drops. Laughter changes shape from self-defense to hospitality. Risk gets redistributed from the timid few to the willing many. The most surprising side effect is gentleness. You discover that calling a thing by its right name doesn't make the world collapse. It makes it stable enough to hold more love. If you listen for it, you might hear a sentence forming that threads them together. It sounds like, "Let us tell the truth and keep each other from breaking while we do it." That is the fool's vow with the clown's accent and the trickster's nerve. It's a promise you can make out loud in a meeting or whisper to yourself in a mirror before you knock on a door you've been avoiding. It is the kind of sentence that, once spoken, rearranges the furniture of a day. And when night comes and the blue light finally fades, you may notice that your life, still filled with calendars and tasks and ordinary fatigue, has become, by a small margin and a real one, more honest to live. There's a reason the fool keeps slipping past guards. For centuries he has carried a passport stamped with a strange privilege, licensed candor. In courts where a wrong sentence could cost a head, the jester was allowed to cut the air with jokes that would have gotten anyone else banished. He was not above the rules. He was an exception designed to protect the rule that power must hear inconvenient truths or it will swerve into delusion. Picture the scene: a king glittering with certainty, a circle of courtiers fluent in praise, and a small figure in motley who bows, then turns the room like a mirror. He sings a doggerel couplet, and underneath the rhyme the message lands with the clarity of cold water. You are being flattered into blindness. The laughter gives the king a way to look and live. This licensed insolence is older than any single court. Long before velvet thrones and heralds, Agrarian calendars carved out days when the world turned upside down on purpose. Saturnalia in Rome loosened the knots of rank. Servants ate first while masters waited, a ritual reversal that reminded everyone how arbitrary hierarchy can be. Medieval Europe kept the thread with the Feast of Fools, a day of holy misrule in which junior clergy staged mock processions and elected a bishop of fools. The point wasn't chaos for its own sake, it was maintenance. The pressure valve had to open so the whole boiler wouldn't blow. Carnival season in Christian lands, Purim spiels in Jewish towns, later the rowdy pulse of Mardi Gras in New Orleans. All versions of the same social technology. Let laughter redistribute power for a moment, so power can remember the human beings it sits upon. The court jester stood at the center of this technology. He had names in many languages and biographies that blurred into legend. Triblet needling Francis I with impunity, while Summers outliving the tempers of Henry VIII. Stanzik painted with a face so sober you can feel the cost of his jokes. They survived not because monarchs were cute about criticism, but because the arrangement worked. The jester voiced what ministers could not without triggering the immune system of pride. If a decision needed a bruise to regain feeling, the jester delivered it in rhyme. If a rumor turned poisonous, he pierced it with pantomime. He was both clown and counsel, equal parts silliness and statecraft, and his small cap rang like a bell that said, reality would like to be recognized. There were limits, and everyone knew them. The jester's leash was elastic but real. He could not turn a joke into a faction. He could not mock the griefs of the common room and expect to keep his room. His art depended on a precise mixture of affection and audacity. If he stopped loving the people he teased, his words curdled into contempt, and contempt is cheap. The finest jesters practiced an ethic of care. They insulted pretension, but not personhood. They were rough on titles and gentle with humans. That distinction sounds quaint until you watch what happens in a culture that forgets it. The microphone becomes a weapon, and the show becomes a siege. Modern America doesn't wear crowns, but we still host courts every night on glowing rectangles. Our jesters carry microphones, sit behind desks, step onto late-night stages, satirize in news deserts where jokes are the only safe route into fact. We tune in for the adrenaline of dissent and find ourselves educated before we realize class is in session. The laugh is still the key that opens a locked room. There's a clip you've seen 100 times. A host tells a joke about a policy, the audience laughs, the beat hangs, and then the explanation slides in while the jaw is loose. The truth goes down easier because it wasn't shoved, it was shared. The tradition doesn't feel medieval because the furniture changed. The function is the same, licensed candor in a room that needs it. Yet that license is delicate. It relies on two forms of trust running in opposite directions. The public must trust that the jester cares about the common good more than his own brand. And those with power must trust that the jester's sting aims to heal, not to humiliate for sport. When either trust fails, the contract frays. You can feel it. Jokes sharpen into knives that thrill and do no good. Critique metastasizes into a posture so permanent it cannot recognize improvement without losing its identity. The room laughs and leaves a little colder, a little meaner. We need our jesters brave, but we also need them kind. Kind in the rigorous sense of aiming at repair. The old rituals of inversion understood this and built safety rails. Carnival didn't last all year. Misrule had a sunset clause. The very temporary nature of the upside-down day kept the world from dissolving. People could release steam knowing the pot would be set to simmer again. Today, the internet explodes those boundaries. It is always carnival somewhere online, always someone in motley calling for another toppling. The result is a fatigue of endless inversion. If everything is a takedown, nothing is corrected. We just live inside a tire fire. The fool, our wiser cousin to the jester, offers a counterpractice. Make room for reversal when truth requires it. Then restore the order that protects the vulnerable. Disrupt, then reweave. Truth without reweaving is demolition. Order without truth is denial. We need both motions to stay sane. Behind the jokes sits a serious American question. What makes room for licensed candor in a republic? Part of the answer is legal. The scaffolding of the First Amendment, case law that protects satire as a form of political speech, juries that decide the difference between defamation and sharp parody. But most of the answer is cultural, a set of habits we either cultivate or let die. One habit is knowing how to be teased without becoming brittle. Another is knowing how to tease without becoming cruel. A third is recognizing that a jester who never pays a price will drift into self-indulgence, while a culture that punishes every misstep will silence exactly the voices it most needs when reality drifts out of focus. We don't need perfect lines. We need resilient relationships. Humor has a geography. In small rooms, classrooms, church basements, squad cars, nurses' stations, jesters work best when they live with the consequences of their jokes. A teacher who teases also grades. A chaplain who quips also sits at the bedside. A sergeant who cracks a line also catches the shift's hardest call. Skin in the game disciplines the tongue. In giant rooms, national broadcasts, viral threads, the discipline must be chosen, not enforced. A distant jester must carry a near conscience. You can hear it when they do. The sarcasm softens at the exact moment a stranger's dignity hangs in the balance. A trace of tenderness enters the sentence. The listener recognizes it and leans forward. That tenderness doesn't blunt the edge. It keeps the edge from severing the thing we're trying to save. History is generous with examples of jesters who saved the day because someone in power chose not to punish the bruise. A monarch hears an unflattering rhyme and laughs, then changes a policy at breakfast. A mayor endures a roast and later fixes the potholes embedded in the punchline. A CEO listens to an internal satirist and rewrites a memo before it cements a mistake into culture. None of these episodes trend. They do their work in the quiet economy of course correction. But because they do not trend, we forget that this is how societies remain navigable, by creating microclimates where truth can be spoken unglamorously and heard without a public collapse. The jester is valuable not for his spectacle, but for his catalytic effect on decision-making. Of course, the license to speak truth with humor can be abused. There are performers who confuse punching down with courage, who mind trauma they don't share for laughs they don't need, who lob truth-adjacent grenades and walk away believing it's just a joke, is an absolution. The remedy is not to outlaw jokes. It is to raise the craft. The best jesters do their homework. They aim carefully. They invite the butt of the joke back into the circle after the laugh, often with a gesture so small only the person on stage feels it. They know that the real art is not the line that slays. It is the shared breath that follows when the room realizes no one has been left outside the firelight. Carnival has another lesson for modern nerves. Reversal is not merely entertainment. It is rehearsal. A community that practices flipping roles on safe days grows a muscle for empathy on hard ones. When you play at being the one with less power, you learn to feel where the floor tilts. When you pretend to rule for an hour, you discover how quickly flattery fogs the mind. The rehearsal does not make the world fair, but it makes people readier to make it fairer. The jester is a rehearsal coach. He shows you, with glitter and nonsense, how to live without lies for just long enough to crave that diet for real. In personal life, Licensed candor looks humbler than motley. It looks like the friend you grant the right to interrupt you when you're narrating yourself into a ditch. It looks like the partner who can say, "You're telling that story again," without starting a war, because the two of you made an agreement that truth is welcome even when it stings. It looks like a teenager teasing a parent out of performative calm with a well-aimed eye roll and a grin that says, "Hey, be real with me." These micro-contracts repair families. They are the home edition of the court jester's role, and they work for the same reason. Love plus permission equals room for course correction. The shadow of cancellation haunts this territory, and it deserves an honest word. There are things worth canceling, abuses that must be named, patterns that must be stopped, harms that require boundaries. But a culture that treats every misfired joke as proof of unredeemable character will starve itself of jesters, and with them, an oxygen line to self-awareness. The answer is not to lower standards. It is to raise paths back. If apology becomes theater and forgiveness becomes taboo, we all stop learning and start hiding. Licensed candor withers without licensed repair. The fool keeps both licenses in his pocket and knows when to flash which. It helps to remember that behind every famous jester we can name are thousands of ordinary ones doing untelevised work. The receptionist who cracks a line that lets a tense waiting room exhale. The bus driver who narrates the potholes like a sportscaster until a city council meeting fills up with citizens suddenly fluent in infrastructure. The junior coder who turns a brittle code review into a cooperative rewrite with one self-deprecating sentence that punctures pride. These are not small victories. They are the way the human world resists ossifying into something too hard to inhabit. So what do we do with all of this if we don't own a stage or a scepter? We borrow the spirit and mind the aim. We practice a candor topped with a smile that doesn't hide the medicine. We make tiny carnivals where they heal, an afternoon where the intern runs the agenda, an evening where the quietest person chooses the song, a dinner where the first toast is a confession. We refuse the lazy contempt that dresses up as sophistication. We cultivate the ability to laugh at our office and then fix the thing we laughed at. We remember that the point of joking with power is not to win against it, but to bend it back toward its purpose, serving the lives that gave it permission to exist. And when the day ends, we hang up the motley and keep the muscle. The fool, after all, is not obsessed with performance. He is devoted to reality. If the joke made it easier to touch reality, it was holy work. If it didn't, we try again tomorrow with more tenderness and a steadier aim. Licensed candor is not a loophole to be exploited. It is a trust to be honored. Done well, it keeps leaders from floating off into the self-affirming stratosphere, keeps citizens from calcifying into factions, keeps families from mistaking politeness for peace. It keeps a soul honest enough to breathe. Some nights the world will still feel armored, stubborn, unlistening. On those nights the fool will try the door with a soft knock and a line so light you barely notice you've said yes to hearing what comes next. He will ask you to laugh, not to look away, but to look deeper without losing heart. He will offer the ancient medicine of an upside-down minute so that, when the minute ends, you can live the right-side-up hours with a little more grace. And in the small relief that follows, he will have done what jesters have always done in the best courts and the worst crises. He will have made it briefly possible to be human together in a room that had forgotten how. Literature keeps returning to the fool not because writers love chaos, but because they trust him with the keys to hidden rooms. He walks into a story and the air changes. The other characters' masks start to itch. In some tales he's barely named, a simpleton, a wanderer, a guest who doesn't know the rules. In others he's the only one with a license to speak plainly. Have more than thou showest, speak less than thou knowest. warns King Lear, a line like a lantern carried through a storm. There's a fool on that stage, too, needling a king toward sight by saying what no courtier dares. Shakespeare understood that folly, used rightly, is a corrective device. It scrapes varnish off the truth so it can breathe again. The roads that fools travel in stories are narrow, stony, and strangely luminous. Parsifal begins as a boy who knows almost nothing. He doesn't even know his own name in some tellings, and yet his ignorance is fertile ground. He stumbles, offends, misunderstands, and still keeps asking the question that saves a wounded king. What ails you? The court offends him for breaking their ceremonies. Life rewards him for breaking their silence. The lesson isn't that ignorance is holy. The lesson is that humility keeps the door unlocked. A beginner can enter where the expert is stuck arguing with the lock. Cervantes sends a hidalgo onto Spain's roads wearing a knight's dream as armor. Don Quixote tilts at windmills and is mocked by every practical eye. And yet, in the glow of his misperception, the world brightens. People around him remember what longing feels like. A barber's basin becomes a golden helmet for a few radiant minutes. A humble inn, a castle, a weary muleteer, a lady. Is this delusion or medicine? It is both and neither. Quixote's folly keeps the weathered heart supple. He is wrong in the ledger and right in the soul. And sometimes that paradox is what keeps us from becoming utilitarian ghosts of ourselves. The fool's wager is that a touch of sacred, as if can midwife a better as is. These pilgrims share a compass. They keep choosing reality over reputation, love over leverage, wonder over the safety of the script. They pay for it, every one of them. Parsifal pays with humiliation. Quixote pays with bruises and laughter that isn't always kind. But they leave gifts behind them that sober men couldn't deliver. They leave rooms where a different conversation becomes possible, households where tenderness returned like a heron to an old marsh, cities where a bureaucrat hesitates before signing something that would grind another human down. We recognize the pattern because it repeats outside books, under fluorescents, and in parking lots. A nurse on night shift asks the question the specialist forgot, and a patient's path bends away from danger. A custodian notices a smell in the corridor and prevents a fire that would never make the news. A child asks a parent why the family is always in a hurry, and a whole schedule gets rethreaded to include dinner at the same table 3 nights a week. The fool is not an exotic creature. He is the part of us that refuses to be anesthetized by normal. He also refuses the worship of competence. Competence is good. It is not a god. When competence becomes our idol, we start hiding our unfinishedness the way empires hide debt. Literature uses the fool to puncture that illusion without humiliating the human behind it. Think of Lear raging forward into a storm as if weather could be negotiated, and think of his fool, the most faithful creature in the kingdom, telling him in riddles what the wind is saying in plain prose. You cannot legislate the sky. The fool's jokes are not entertainment. They are life support for wisdom. American life needs this medicine precisely because we are so good at staging. We stage our careers, our marriages, our grief, even our rest. The Book of the Fool says, rest that is scheduled against the clock but not welcomed by the body is a parody of rest. Love that is announced but not practiced in the small hours is a press release. Grief that is curated for social consumption evaporates before it waters anything living. The fool's presence makes these sentences hard to dodge because he won't argue doctrine. He'll point at the thing itself, a tired face, a brittle voice, a swerve in a child's eyes, and ask, without sarcasm, if this is really how we meant to live. Because he is not busy guarding a brand, the fool can stay with the unstageable. He can sit in silence until the next true sentence is ready, which is why great scenes often go quiet around him. In those silences, characters stop performing and start telling the truth that hurts in a helpful way. You can feel the room tip toward reality as if someone had opened a window on a stale afternoon. A minute later, air returns, and with it the ability to choose something that isn't the script we've been trapped in. This is why stories trust the fool at crossroads. He sees thresholds for what they are, invitations, not proofs. When someone demands a meta-narrative and a map, he hands them a question and a compass. It sounds like cowardice from a distance. Up close it is reverence for the terrain. A map is only kind to you if it respects the mountain as much as your itinerary. The fool respects the mountain. He also respects the audience. That's the quiet secret of how folly works on us. We lower our guard because we don't feel managed. When a character says a line that is too clever by half, our stomachs tighten. We can smell the manipulation. When the fool blurts a homely truth with a grin, our lungs expand. We sense that he's not trying to win, only to keep us from losing ourselves. The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. The old Athenian insight runs, and inside a story this isn't a riddle, it's a relief. Ignorance, admitted, becomes a clean table where we can finally put the facts down and eat. Even the tarot, that wandering cabinet of images, puts the fool at card 0. He steps off a cliff with a flower in his hand and a small dog at his heel, as if to say that beginnings are by nature precarious and joyful at once. Interpreters argue over whether he is naive or blessed, reckless or free. The image gently mocks the argument. He is moving. He trusts that motion and attention will teach him what fear keeps promising to teach and never does. In a more secular key, that's the posture behind every craft worth learning. Painters begin by making bad paintings and keep moving until their hands learn a grammar they couldn't have read. Musicians wreck a dozen scales before a phrase comes out that sounds like weather. Entrepreneurs ship a lopsided first version into a world that will either break it or make it honest. In each case, the only passport is willingness to look briefly foolish en route to something human. This willingness is not evenly rewarded, and the books don't lie about that either. Fools often pay. They are mocked by those who cannot bear their own beginnings, punished by powers that prefer flattery to oxygen, misunderstood by audiences trained to confuse certainty with care. But in story after story, their presence buys time for the truth to find its footing. They slow the stampede. They interrupt the ritual that would have ended badly. They put a hand on the turning wheel and keep it from crushing whoever had been laid beneath it. When I think of the fool's utility in our century, I think of a line of people outside a clinic at dawn, each carrying a private history in a paper folder. I think of a teacher in a classroom where a child keeps breaking, trying sentence after sentence until one lands with dignity instead of diagnosis. I think of a city council meeting where an old man at the microphone tells a story about a crosswalk and changes the budget by $20,000 and prevents a death. None of these people are fools in the cheap sense. They are just brave enough to be seen asking for what is needed without first winning the contest of appearing invulnerable. There is a last gift the archetype offers, and it is the most uncomfortable to accept. He will make you choose. He will hold reality still long enough that you can no longer mistake your pose for your position. He will reveal when your sarcasm is a mask for fear, when your certainty is a moat dug around a withering garden, when your busyness is a way to avoid the work that actually matters. This revelation is not for shame. It is for rescue. The fool doesn't drag you onto the stage for a public verdict. He hands you a backstage mirror and stands guard at the door while you decide what to do next. If you decide, quietly, privately, without fanfare, to take one foolish step toward what is true, Literature assures you of at least this: you are in good company. You will be walking a road where kings learned to listen, knights learned to kneel, and idiots taught cities to breathe. The map won't look like much. It never does at the beginning. But your feet will learn it the old way, by moving. And as you move, the line from Lear will keep its weather-beaten counsel in your pocket. Have more than you show, say less than you know, while Socrates' old comfort hums behind your ribs. The kind of wisdom that matters begins where pretending ends. Jung would say the psyche keeps a workshop no one can enter for us, and the fool is the one worker who never clocks out. He refuses to outsource beginnings. Where the ego wants guarantees, he wants contact. That is why his pockets look empty and his hands are warm. He trusts that reality teaches better than performance, that the world will meet you more than halfway if you stop negotiating with your own fear. Individuation, in this light, is not a high ceremony. It's a daily choice to risk being seen as you are on the way to becoming who you are. The path is circular and open, 0, not 1, like the tarot's fool stepping off the ledge with a flower in his hand. People argue about whether he's reckless or free. The card smiles and keeps walking. The beginning is embarrassing. That is its sacrament. Apprenticeship always looks ungainly from the outside because it is not designed for the outside. It is designed for contact between attention and material. A painter ruins a canvas to learn the weight of color. A coder writes inelegant functions that later teach elegance. A widow learns how to be a person again one clumsy morning at a time. The fool keeps them company, not with advice, but with presence. He is the part of the psyche that refuses to trade the living for the polished. In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, wrote Shunryu Suzuki, handing us a pocket compass in 10 words. In the experts there are few. The point is not to worship ignorance. It is to protect the portal through which new life arrives. There is a hedge around that portal, and it bristles with thorns that look suspiciously like compliments. You've always been the strong one, the chorus says, and suddenly you're not allowed to be tired. You're so put together. They murmur, and it becomes treason to fall apart where someone can see. The fool is a small ladder through that hedge. He lets you climb down from the pedestal before it turns to stone. He will make a joke at the top just so your knees stop locking, and then he will walk beside you while you learn the old art of being a mammal again. Needing, resting, asking, failing, mending. You do not owe the world a statue. You owe your own life a chance. If you want to hear the fool's footsteps, listen in the moments right before you choose self-protection over truth. The email you're polishing so long you can't feel what you mean anymore. The "I'm fine" escaping your mouth while your chest tightens. The plan you defend because it is yours, long after the facts told you it belongs to yesterday. The fool taps the glass from the inside. He doesn't lecture. He asks a humane question. What are you trying to save? If the answer is your image, he suggests a trade. Save your aliveness instead. You can repair a dented image. You cannot live well inside a sealed one. He is not naive about cost. The moment you choose aliveness, some rooms will decide you are difficult. Some colleagues will call your candor disloyalty because their loyalty is to appearances, not to outcomes. Some friends will prefer your mask because it made their mask feel normal. The fool does not promise you a smoother audience. He promises you a truer one. The people who stay will not be the ones hypnotized by your performance. They will be the ones who relax in the presence of your reality, and with them, you will build a weatherproof life. The paradox is that the work most of us call professionalism only reaches its peak when we smuggle the fool back into the office. A team that cannot risk looking foolish cannot learn in public, and a team that cannot learn in public cannot move at the speed truth requires. You can tell when a little folly has been invited back in. Meetings begin to sound like humans talking. Bad news lands without theatrics. A small, saving sentence appears more often. I don't know. Yet. The yet turns ignorance into a bridge instead of a wall. It commits you to reality tomorrow rather than the illusion of mastery today. And reality tends to reward that loyalty. The same alchemy turns families from a stage into a home. A parent says, "I said that badly. Can I try again?" And a child learns that love isn't a scorecard, it's a practice. A teenager laughs at her own glare and says the things she actually meant, and the whole kitchen exhales. A couple stops performing conflict and starts naming it cleanly. Here is what hurt. Here is what I meant to ask for. Here is how I can repair the part that was mine. None of this is glamorous. All of it is holy. The fool is not the absence of discipline. He is the courage that keeps discipline from becoming self-punishment. Even the body understands him. Watch how your shoulders drop when you speak the unvarnished sentence you've been avoiding. Watch how food tastes brighter on the day you do the small brave thing at work. Watch how sleep returns when you accept you cannot sprint your way through grief and you stop pretending you can. The nervous system keeps quieter books than the mind, but it records what matters with exquisite accuracy. It is honest about what heals. It knows the difference between the laugh that numbs and the laugh that lets breath back in. The fool traffics only in the latter. There is a style of American cleverness that the fool finds sterile, and he is right. A foolish consistency, Emerson warned, is the hobgoblin of little minds, but so is a clever inconsistency that never risks fidelity to anything. Irony cannot be your only god. It is excellent salt and a terrible meal. The fool uses irony like a whetstone and then puts it down, choosing to cut fruit rather than mirrors. He will help you notice hypocrisy, yes, and then he will ask you to love something enough to live without it. Freedom isn't an endless shopping aisle of poses. Freedom is making a vow to the right thing and keeping it when the room gets loud. If you look back at the days you call turning points, you'll often find a fool's fingerprint somewhere on the hinge. A friend made you laugh during an argument long enough to see what you were protecting. A stranger asked you a kindergarten question at a grown-up table, and you realized the kindergarten question was the only one that mattered. A teacher told you you'd botched the assignment, then placed a hand on the paper and said, "Start again," in a voice that didn't banish you from belonging. The wisdom was not hidden in a labyrinth. It was standing in the doorway with a grin, asking if you were ready to drop the costume. And when the costume finally falls, the air tastes different. The room is the same. The people are the same. The facts are unchanged. And yet the geometry of choices expands. You can make a smaller promise and actually keep it. You can tell a cleaner truth and survive the blush. You can take a clumsy first step toward the work that has been staring at you from the corner of your life. The work that would rather have you awkward and present than polished and absent. This is the fool's arithmetic. Trade 10 points of image for 1 ounce of reality, and you will sleep like someone who belongs to their own days. There will still be nights when the armor calls to you. Nights when the old fluency of performance feels easier than the new grammar of presence. On those nights the fool is gentle. He doesn't knock the armor from your hands. He invites you to set it down beside you, just for the length of one conversation. See how it feels, he says, to let the jaw unclench while you tell the story without the part where you make yourself the hero. See how it feels to listen without crafting a counterargument. See how it feels to be porous to another person's reality without losing your own. If it feels like exposure at first, notice the moment it turns into relief. And if, somewhere in this long walk, you caught your breath and thought, "Yes, this is the medicine I needed," then you already know the last step. Keep the medicine moving. There is a small, luminous economy that keeps honest wonder alive in the night hours when the world is loud with certainty and thin on grace. If these questions kept you company, if this kind of brave laughter and unvarnished truth is the light you want more of in your own midnight, consider adding your candle to ours. Subscribe to Archetypes Products, a quiet vow that you wish to meet the world without the mask a little more often. Tap the like as a tiny vote for reality over performance. And tell me, in the comments, the sentence you are ready to say without polish, because somewhere, someone needs that sentence to find their way back to their life.